Is he getting the chairs? Hello? Can you all hear me? Is the sound quality good in here? Right. Well, I think we're going to start on time. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Wendy Blythe. I'm chair of FeCRA, the Federation of Cambridge Residents Associations. We're delighted to welcome you all to tonight's talk by Peter Freeman, the chair of the government-appointed Cambridge Growth Company. As you probably know, the government has set up the Cambridge Growth Company to turbocharge Cambridge as the model for UK growth and to build 150,000 homes. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has said the Oxford to Cambridge area has the potential to be Europe's Silicon Valley, and has announced plans to create an Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor, which he said could add up to 78 billion to the UK economy by 2035. Our guest tonight is the co-founder of King's Cross developer Argent and the outgoing chairman of Homes England. He is an accomplished development and regeneration professional with a wealth of experience in delivering complex, mixed-use projects. It's reported, it's reported that the Growth Company will focus on enabling and accelerating key developments in and around Cambridge, developing the evidence base to support an infrastructure-first growth plan, and identifying solutions to complex constraints that are holding back sustainable growth. Peter Freeman has said the need to fix the city's water scarcity, congested transport, and affordable housing shortage is the trinity of hurdles that need to be cleared away for Cambridge to grow. Water will be even more of an issue because the government's flagship plans for this water-short region will involve heavy investment in data centres, which are very thirsty consumers of water, and will need to address the problems of what to do about wastewater and all the sewage in the CAM. Meanwhile, the papers are reporting that drought for this region is looming. The Federation of Cambridge Residents Associations, FeCRA, was set up in order to give residents a say on planning matters and to be a source of information and mutual support, a voice of scrutiny on the quality of life in Cambridge. So we were delighted when Peter Freeman accepted the committee's invitation to tell us about his plans for Cambridge, because many residents are telling us they know nothing about the Cambridge Growth Company or the plans for Cambridge. Residents say they want to know that if they have a problem, they have someone to go to, whether this is a doctor or a counsellor. They want to feel that they're not being done to, that they have a say about where they live and in shaping change so that it makes a positive contribution to their lives, whether it's homes, schools, health, jobs, transport and services, or their city's green spaces, its trees, wildlife and river, the things that make Cambridge unique and special. So, the challenge for Peter tonight will be to tell us about what is planned for Cambridge in half an hour that will make Cambridge residents happy and will improve their lives. Over to you, Peter.
I'd like to thank Wendy for that generous introduction. It was said in the Second World War that careless talk costs lives, and me talking carelessly to Wendy at a landmark Chambers seminar at Cambridge about happy cities may have cost my life tonight. I can tell you're not all beaming at the idea of more development in Cambridge, and what I will try and do tonight is give you a sense that what we are doing will be done thoughtfully and carefully, and whatever comes out of it will be the best form of growth, even if growth isn't what you're all looking for at the outset of the evening. I should say that these are my personal observations, born of many journeys of wandering around England and the wider world, being fascinated by the similarities and contrasts of life in different cities and different parts of each city. What works and doesn't work in creating places where people feel happy and safe. What makes Mayfair worth £400 and Old Kent Road only 60. My first journeys alone into the big world were in 1962, when aged 6, my mother thought it was safe for me to walk to school 10 minutes away, unaccompanied except by my faithful dog, who'd accompany me to the school gate and then return home unaccompanied. I still think a neighbourhood where children can walk to school is the heart of community. My interest in places turned into a profession 44 years ago in 1981, when I started a small development company with my brother. Before that, we both read history and qualified as solicitors. For the last 5 years, I've been a public servant, first as chair of Homes England, and now as chair of the Cambridge Growth Company. But although these are my personal views, I believe they are also in line with the government's policies for Cambridge, which support the importance of place making and the quality of life. Not just because the setting of our lives is vitally important to well-being, but because development that is just about housing numbers will fail to deliver those numbers. Soulless development cannot attract the demand or the support needed to transform the level of housing output. For the level of build-out needed to grow our economy, development must be seen to be carefully thought out, mixed use and multi-tenure. With the creation of public open space, new schools and doctors' surgeries as important as the number of homes and workplaces. If the quality of placemaking is not there, the demand from occupiers will be limited, and the opposition from existing residents formidable. I'm relying on you for that. So getting it right in the design and infrastructure terms is vital to the economic mission as well as the human mission. It's particularly important to get it right in Cambridge, not only to protect a unique heritage built over more than 800 years, but also to ensure the city works better for the people who already live here, so that they can benefit from future growth, while also attracting more scientists and great minds who help make Cambridge a global centre of academic excellence and economic vitality. So as chair of the Cambridge Growth Company, I can give you my commitment that I am determined that further development in Cambridge will be designed and delivered in a way that brings public benefit, not detriment to Cambridge residents. I will say more about the Cambridge Growth Company, CGC, later. For the moment, worth noting that its website went live last week and has attached to it the detailed brief from the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, to me in this role. The government aims are clearly set out there. My third point in setting out the context for tonight's discussion is that what I say tonight is general rather than specific. I'm not going to put a map up and say this area will be developed and that area will not. It's for two reasons. First, because I simply don't know yet. The evidence base which is needed to underpin assessments of the quantity, timing and location of development has only just been commissioned. It would be premature to reach conclusions. And that work, which is being carried out by a consultant team led by Bureau Happold and Pryor and Partners, and it will include consultation with the public as part of the evidence base. It's expected to report early next year. So we need to let that process play out before drawing any conclusions. The second reason is that even if I was in a position to share location ideas with you, I think the locally elected leaders, councillors, and the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service would have every right to have me taken out and shot if I shared them with you before sharing with them. Even if I wasn't shot by the local leaders, I'd be sure to be shot by those in Westminster. As a pioneer, it's not, of course, that I'm afraid of being shot, but I'd like to survive long enough to come back in 12 to 18 months and be able to answer your questions more fully. So for today, discretion has to be the better part of valour. I welcome a meaningful and open discussion, but please can we keep it to the general principles for the moment. Let's consider first why few people welcome new development, even if we all need places to live, and most of us spend some time visiting and wondering at some of the best places that have been created in the past. Then let's examine what good practice and development can bring. Then let's look at what it would take to make very rare best practice more commonplace and to ensure those processes become the overriding practice as Cambridge grows. My goal is that in 15 years' time, when local leaders and urbanists from around the world are looking for best practice, they will be advised to go straight to Cambridge. When study court tours come, let's make sure they find a Cambridge with more accessible public open space per person than today, with better medical and school facilities, with less traffic congestion, with more of the workforce living within an easy journey to work, with a sense that Cambridge is a brilliant place to grow up, to bring a family up, to grow old, to get a job or to start a business. A place where 1 million trees have been planted and green corridors and stepping stones have been established for biodiversity and leisure. So to recap, my structure tonight will be first, where development falls short, second, examples of good development and happy cities, and finally, the approach which will ensure future development is well conceived and designed and delivers benefits for existing residents as well as future ones. We can dismiss and easily identify the factors that people oppose about new development, concern about infrastructure deficits, whether it's traffic congestion or waiting lists at doctors' surgeries, dislike of anonymous housing estates, where the street pattern has been designed solely for efficiency and does not create avenues or squares, estates where no tree breaks the roofline and design lacks well-thought-out details and good proportions. Sadness at the lack of anchors, the village pond and pub that we need, and the primary school all within easy walking distance. The lack of opportunity in many housing estates to bump into people and feel part of a neighbourhood or community. It doesn't take long to identify those things that we don't like. For me, these are the qualities, or rather lack of qualities, that show too much contemporary development has not tried hard enough. We need to do better than that. And that's an example of something that was better than that, planned a long time ago. Regardless of budget, let's now look at why you've chosen to live in Cambridge rather than any other city in England or the world. Regardless of budget, there is no place that ticks absolutely every box. You might want the amenities of a great city in terms of culture, education, job opportunities and medical care. But you might also want to be alone in the mountains or near the sea, have no neighbours in sight. You might prefer the anonymity of a large city or the coziness of a village where you know everyone, but they also know your business. Is it London or is it Ambridge? Is it Paris or a hamlet in Normandy? I suspect that apart from any special affiliation to the universities, most of you love Cambridge because it offers a fabulous halfway house between the metropolitan extremes of London and Paris on the one hand, or the parochialism of Ambridge or even Barchester on the other. Cambridge is a great place and I love visiting it. So for me, what makes a well-functioning place is easily seen in the next few slides. It's partly about the design of buildings themselves, but I think more importantly, the setting of the buildings, the places they enclose, and the rich variety of opportunities and amenities nearby. This slide shows the level of service and amenity required by communities of different sizes and reflect what is practical within a village or small town or a quarter of a significant town. I can't actually see from here. The smaller bars, which are sort of 200, 300 metres, take you to the local park to go and push your children or grandchildren on a swing. The medium-sized ones take you to a secondary school, and the further ones get you to a hospital. And, you know, the point is that you can't have everything within 5 minutes walk, but if possible, you should have almost everything within 25 minutes walk. And I think that's what placemaking is about. It's the adjacency of housing, jobs, leisure, health and education. So part of the attraction of Cambridge is, while being relatively small, it offers exceptional heritage in the form of beautiful buildings and cherished landscape around the backs or up at Wandlebury, fantastic higher education and healthcare. The city itself only has 150,000 residents, and even the biggest villages like Great Shelford, Sawston and Milton only have 3,000 to 7,000. But it's not perfect. Traffic congestion and long journey times for relatively short journeys are a real problem. Housing is too expensive for many. The aquifers are drying up. Solutions to all of these are needed, and I believe the Cambridge Growth Company can play a vital role in delivering those essential solutions. Water management in particular is an area where we are already making good progress. Through the establishment of the Water Scarcity Group, we brought together water companies, the Environment Agency and local partners to address the issue head-on, ensuring there is an adequate water supply and infrastructure available for growth. To date, this work has already unlocked planning applications for over 9,000 homes and nearly 500,000 square feet of commercial space, including the recently approved Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital. I'm happy to answer questions later on why I think the Growth Company is a useful addition to what may appear already a complex series of local governments. I'd like to show you some slides of places and people enjoying them that were all the result of deliberate thought and planning. Places that I believe enhance quality of life, not detract from it. Some of them go back to the days when peasants, patrons and property owners just took pride in beautiful places. Some of them have been built more recently under the constraints of planning rules and regulations and the demands of a market economy. You might not like them all, but I hope you will accept that development isn't all bad, and then join me in the search to create the environment in which development brings benefit, not harm, to existing communities. I think you'll all recognise that. That's Jesus Green. Somebody had to envisage an avenue of trees, plant an avenue of trees, and preserve 25 acres in the middle of the city. And for me, public open space is absolutely at the heart of quality development. Some more quality developments you'll probably recognise. Clare Bridge, Barrington Village Green, which I'm told is the longest village green in Europe, and Hobson's Conduit, which when I walked past it today was looking a bit weedy. But all beautiful things, and water and village greens should be at the heart of development. In more dense areas, it will be a hard landscape square with fountains. In more rural or open areas, a kind of greener, more natural space. These may be centuries old, but even in recent history, Cambridge has seen some excellent examples of contemporary design, building on the traditions of the old, creating communities, enabling more people to live close to jobs. You'll recognise most of these. There's Great Knighton, Accordia, Marmalade, Eddington, and Trumpeton Meadows. Countryside's development at Great Knighton brought with the housing a doctor's surgery, a primary school and secondary school. And Grosvenor's development at Trumpeton Meadows brought with it a 120-acre public park and nature reserve. So not all development is bad, and it does often and can bring benefits. And one of the jobs of the Growth Company is to insist that the planning agreements that go with land releases bring those benefits. These are a few local examples. You may prefer the architecture in some to others. I particularly like the timber-clad barn references at Knighton. But leaving preferences aside, I think they are all able, determined and successful attempts to design attractive buildings appropriately set in a local context and creating good, connected places to live. Not too dense, not too suburban, not entirely reliant on cars. I think in one of them, in the middle there, you can see people sitting out in Eddington under picnic benches. And part of placemaking is allowing and arranging the events that animate and bring communities together. Allow me to share a couple of projects in which I have had a personal hand, probably took up nearly 25 years of my life, actually 30 years of my life. Oh, sorry, there's some more. Okay. It's not going on anymore. Yeah. So, the one where you see more bare land is Brindley Place in Birmingham, and it's sort of where I cut my teeth on urbanism. We bought a 17-acre site in the middle of Birmingham in 1993. And as opposed to just building a building or two buildings, which is what I'd done for the first 12 years of being a developer, we built 3 public squares, we built 20 buildings around a canal, and if you can see some sort of bits of green, 3 bits of green with two white limestone paths through them, they were the public square that we built before any building was finished. And in 2 other major developments we've done since, we've led with the public open space always. It gives confidence to the community that there's benefit. It gives confidence to commercial occupiers or residents, and it's the right thing to do. The other slide is King's Cross before we started redeveloping it. It was largely sort of rubble heaps left over from digging out the tunnel to link to Paris. It was also known for drugs and prostitution. It wasn't a safe place or a nice place. So in the next images, you can see the neoclassical building is at Brindley Place. You can still see the sort of green in the paths where the fountains were in the first illustration before we'd started building. And the other illustration is King's Cross, virtually finished 16 years after we started building it. Actually, 25 years after we started working on it. It was 6 years for planning, 2 years for getting vacant possession to start build. So you have to be prepared to take a very long-term and consistent view. And if you have questions later about the Growth Company, I think part of the purpose of it is to give consistency over time. Those are people enjoying themselves at King's Cross. There's yoga on what are called the Ghat Steps, named Ghat Steps after those in India and in Varanasi. And where the Ghat Steps were, there was a very steep cutting. You couldn't get to the canal. You couldn't enjoy it. Now you can do your yoga next to the canal. You can watch films from the steps on summer's evenings. You can see children playing in a city primary school we built and we sponsor. You can see various market activities. If you've got very good eyes, you can see children running in the fountains behind the people sitting in yellow chairs. King's Cross is absolutely the opposite of a gated community. Nobody has to queue, pay, book to go there. And in a way, the fountains in the main square are a kind of free butlins for the people in the local housing estates. We've also just started something called Brent Cross Town. And again, this 7-acre public park was the first thing we built. This is something I worked on in Homes England. Homes England and Network Rail owned 125 acres next to York Railway Station. It was old marshalling yards, completely derelict. We're building 2,500 homes there. We're building employment space for about 6,000 people. But importantly, again, the first thing we're doing is the public squares to go next to the National Railway Museum. The next slide is a bit more cerebral, and I don't know how much people better to read it, but I will kind of spell out the interesting things on it. And I didn't know how interesting they were when I commissioned it, because I didn't know how the outcomes would map each other so perfectly. So I've compared three different sorts of local authority for the density of jobs and housing. So the first two are Cambridge City Council and Oxford City Council. They're both about 4,000 hectares. One has 61,000 dwellings, one has 64,000, one has 15 dwellings to an acre, one has 14 to an acre, one has 28 jobs, and one has 27 jobs to the hectare. So you may not have realised it, but you are almost a twin of Oxford, or of course Oxford is a twin of you, or a younger sibling or something. The next two are Camden and Islington, two inner London boroughs, and they also map very closely. One has 55 dwellings per acre, one has 75, so about 5 times as much as Oxford and Cambridge. And despite that sounding a lot more dense, Camden is capable of being home to the 800-acre Hampstead Heath. So you can pack a lot of homes and a lot of public open space into the same place. And then their jobs per hectare are nearly 6 times that of Oxford and Cambridge. And then I took the rural boroughs. I took South Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire, Cherwell and South Oxfordshire. And again, astonishing how they map to each other. They're all effectively 1 dwelling per hectare overall, and they're all effectively about 1 job per hectare overall. And I think part of the reason for me showing you this is that in master planning at scale for Greater Cambridgeshire, you can pack a lot of growth into a relatively small area. The city of Cambridge is only a 22nd of the area of South Cambridgeshire. So if there is growth, it really doesn't have to use a high percentage of land. And if you make the growth intelligently and connected, you can get people much nearer to their work, their hospitals, and their friends. So I think those sort of statistics actually are, to some extent, at the core of how you lay out places. You will probably know that our king is also a bit of a placemaker. And these are images from Poundbury, which he started on 30 years ago. It's a new quarter on the edge of Dorchester, the small county town of Dorset. The designs are traditional, vernacular, mostly 2 or 3 story, many green verges and trees. The cars are tucked cunningly behind in courts rather than overwhelming the streets. Most impressively, there were plenty of small businesses premises with residential above, offering the chance for local entrepreneurs to create their own businesses in an attractive setting. It's proper placemaking. I hope all of these various images convey my belief that although taste and elevations may be subjective, the difference between well-conceived placemaking, master plan development, and an average single-use housing estate or business park is stark and obvious. We want a plan for the combination for the place. I recognise that government's announced ambition for growth around Cambridge are very large, and the illustrations I've used to date, although reflecting some major developments, are not of that overall scale. I'd like to talk briefly to an image created by Ebenezer Howard, the inventor of new towns over 100 years ago. It's a very simple diagram, and it was the thought piece that led to Letchworth Garden City, the first garden city in the world, and still a place where resident satisfaction is extremely high. I'm not suggesting the growth of Cambridge will be based on Ebenezer's model, but its simplicity is helpful to make some points that were true then and are true now. ultimately, we all live in relatively small, immediate neighbourhoods that are impacted on, both positively and negatively, by how they relate to larger neighbourhoods, districts, quarters, regions, countries, and before Trump, once upon a time, to the open whole world. Ebenezer's model envisages a population of 250,000 in a city region made up of 6 30,000 people smaller towns, circling one larger town of 60,000 people. Within each 30,000 town, distances are sufficiently close that everyone could walk or cycle to school, or work or shop, and meet friends. A town full also of allotments and gardens big enough for people to grow their own, which was his aim over 100 years ago. Between the towns, rapid transport by train. Conceived before the age of the car, it provided a guide to how bustling areas nestled within the countryside to provide a source of fresh food and leisure. On the other image is an aerial view today of Letchworth. You can see that it's green, it's spacious, it has boulevards, and as I said, it's a place where people still say they have enormous satisfaction living there. So planned communities can work. I'm going to be very quick now. Okay, I'm going to skip this slide. So my final points were about how we can embed best practice and what is best practice. And for me, the sort of thing that keeps the Howard Walden estate or the Grosvenor estate or King's Cross going is the cohesiveness and the stewardship. And I'd like to just quickly talk about the 6 things that make it work. You've got to have an overall vision. You've got to have a master plan. The master plan must be around community and open space. I don't know what's going on here. I'll skip the slides. I'll just talk, Wendy. Much better at just talking. You've got to get land assembly at sufficient scale. You've got to get sufficient infrastructure and transport for schools. You've got to have a long-term business plan and financing. It doesn't work if you just draw the plan. If you haven't got the money lined up, and an important job of the Cambridge Growth Company is to be the kind of go-between between local government, local communities and the Treasury, to say to the Treasury, if you want this to fly, the money needs to be there. There's got to be the political will to deliver, and it's got to be a will to deliver past 1 election cycle or 2 election cycles, because it takes longer. So getting everything firmed up in a kind of planned, documentary way and getting cross-party buy-in is important. And finally, you've got to get a talented team together who really regard this as a mission rather than just a job before they take another job in 2 years' time. The team that put King's Cross together, probably the 8 key people stayed for a minimum of 12 years each. Probably 4 of them stayed for over 20 years on the project. And it's that sort of team that I would like to see being built up in Cambridge. So 6 conditions, which I'll maybe leave up on the board for making it work. Yeah, I think that's the 6. Yeah. And I think at that point, I'll probably stop because Wendy would like me to.
You off in your prime as well. Yes. So Peter's going to take questions now, and I just have an apology to make to everybody, because in the rush to get started, I forgot to say where all the emergency exits were. So you have the west nave here is the exit, and then 2 exits to the sides on the south and the north. And yes, so Peter's going to take questions. We'll kick off with a couple of questions that have already been sent in, with priority given to the first ones received, and then we'll open to the floor for questions. Now, I just have one question for Peter myself, just to clarify. What you haven't said, and I understand your discretion about all this, but what is the geographic area to be covered by the Cambridge Growth Company for building 150,000 houses? We're all agog. Well, what is the actual area?
So The first thing is there's not a definite number yet. The definite number will come out of the evidence base.
Mike, is it not working? Jake, Peter's mic's not working. This is very key. Key answer.
The first thing is there isn't a definite number yet. That will come out of the evidence base, and the evidence base will involve consultation and lots of going back and forth between Westminster and Cambridge. The area is a matter partly of what we can focus on. And the comments I've made about delivering King's Cross are intensely about focus. So if the government said to me, why don't you manage the whole area from Norwich to Oxford, I'd say you've got to be kidding. I spent 4.5 years at Homes England speed dating every town in the country, and I'm much, much happier focusing on Cambridge. So whether it's a sort of 5 or 10 mile radius, whether it's consistent with whatever new unitary authority comes out, it will be a reasonably coherent and tight geography close to Cambridge.
Sorry, can I just, on that, just to clarify, sorry. So all the growth that we've got in the local plan, existing growth, places like Northstowe, Waterbeach, Bourne, etc.
They're included.
They're included. But what you're proposing is on top of that. Is that right?
No, the 150,000, if that was the number, would include
That's really helpful.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is for a longer period than the emerging local plan.
Period. Okay, that's very helpful.
I mean, I think the important thing is, when Michael Gove first asked me to do this, he said, what about 2040? And I said, you have to be kidding. We barely have started building. And I don't regard 2050 or anything as a particular cut-off date. To an extent, I regard the number and the extent as necessary to justify the best transport infrastructure being planned from day one. And whether it gets built a bit quicker or a bit slower, it's planning for a generation and a half ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll kick off with questions that have been submitted, which we're taking by order which they were submitted. So I'm going to take a first question from, and when people are asking questions, please will they stand up and say who they are, and say if they're representing a community group or whatsoever. So we've got a question first from Terry McAllister, who is former editor of The Guardian. Energy editor
and please shout, because I'm a bit deaf.
Yeah.
No, I'll speak very loudly, and thank you very much, Wendy. So I'm a co-founder of Friends of the Cam, the River Group. But I'm also spent 40 years as a financial journalist, so I'm not a sort of wide-eyed environmentalist without regard for the wider sphere. You very kindly touched on a number of issues that we're concerned about. But can I take you back, say 20 years, when I first arrived in this city, when already since that period, tens of thousands of new homes, more science parks, and a major increase in the population of Cambridge has taken place. With this growth, urged on by the university, landowners, corporate interests, and now government, has come soaring inequality, which you haven't mentioned, and it's said to be the most unequal city in Britain. Log-jammed roads, which you did mention, water shortages, and overrun Addenbrooks, and depleted nature. The centrepiece of the city, the River Cam, is itself now dangerous to swim in due to over-abstraction and rising levels of sewage. There has been no appropriate public expenditure on the wider infrastructure needed to cope with existing demands on services and nature in Cambridge, never mind increases in demand. Yet your growth company has been set up by government specifically to fast-track and push through even greater development in this area, primarily just to feed Treasury revenues. This is clearly designed to bypass democratic procedures and opposition, whether based on BATs or plain common sense. I do not hear government promising a blizzard of public spending on affordable houses, on appropriate bus services, on a new general hospital capacity, or immediate spending on sewage works like the big polluting facility at Haslingfield. Instead, the government claims to have no money and has to make major cuts nationally. Why would local people be anything other than completely opposed to what you're doing? Thank you.
You couldn't have put that more bluntly. So government doesn't have a lot of money, but government has to back winners, and Cambridge is a winner. But as I said repeatedly, and I absolutely mean, it won't be a winner for government unless it is good, unless it brings benefit. Cambridge is already getting to a sort of peak moment when potential science-based companies come, look and say, housing is too expensive for our staff, traffic congestion is too bad, and although we bought some time with the water crisis, we haven't bought enormous time. So all of these problems need to be resolved. The sense in which they can be resolved more easily, to the extent it takes money in Cambridge than many other places, is the land values that are generated by life sciences or by private housing here are very high. And the sort of transaction that we will be looking to make with landowners on housing land is, and certainly if any is in the Greenbelt, that is now published government policy, 50% must be affordable. It must be fully grant funded by the landowner from the land that they get to sell for market houses. And that mathematics really does work in Cambridge. I won't go into details of which infrastructure projects, but there are some infrastructure projects that are near and dear to local leaders, which I believe we will be able to get financed in the next year or two, which at the moment there isn't money locally and there isn't money centrally. But by promoting some of the major land releases and doing smart deals with the landowners, we will be able to get that money out to get the infrastructure. And I will say again, not only that it's a personal commitment of mine that we have to do this right, but there's no point doing it any other way because the take-up won't happen.
Sorry, I'm just taking a few questions were submitted first, and we've got another one on water from John Latham, who is who's on the FeCRA committee. He's also the chair of the Hobson's Conduit Trust, which featured in a very, if people haven't seen it, an absolutely fantastic film by Tony Eva, who I think is here tonight, and I urge everybody to see it. It's called Pure Clean Water. Well worth seeing, Peter.
So thanks, Wendy, and thank you, Peter. Just to throw out a few numbers, in 1952, Cambridge Water was taking 17 million litres a day out of the chalk for the public water supply. By 1963, that was 36 million litres a day. By 1981, it was 65 million litres a day. We're now touching on 100 million litres a day. That's 6 times more than 1952. Current projections for housing completions are looking towards 35,000 residential units completed by 2032. And there's an expectation that those new units will achieve 110 litres per person per day. So if we do the arithmetic, we end up with something like 10% additional demand on the aquifer by 2032. Then in 2032, we hope to get 26 million litres a day from Grafham water. So if you assume that that is getting on for 20%, you can see that we're not going to make much difference with Grafham water supply to the stress on the aquifer. And then coming on to 2035 or 36, we can look forward to the Fens Reservoir in Chatteris. That, though, together will only reduce the demand on the aquifer back to the point that the Environment Agency sees as critical to restoring chalk streams and the quality of watercourses. So against that rather bleak outlook, what hope, Peter, do you have that some of that relief for the aquifer may be brought forward? And what hope do you have that once we get to 2036, we won't suddenly find that we're putting the pressure back on because the slack has already been taken up?
I'm not a water expert. It's a good free pass on lots of subjects, but one of the roles of a developer, or now the role as chair of the Cambridge Growth Company, is to bring the very best possible experts together to get them organised and motivated to find solutions. So some of you may know that on the advisory council we formed, as well as the 4 elected local leaders, the 3 other members included Dr. Paul Leinster, who was himself the chief executive of the Environment Agency, who was a senior executive at Anglia Water, is chair of Water Resources East, lives locally, was actually chair of the Bedford and Peterborough Housing Association. And I look to him and a team under him to find solutions. We attended a meeting recently with some major farmers in the southern levels, and they pointed out that they are pumping out, because they're kind of below sea level, they're pumping out tons of water into the rivers, to the seas every day, and we're now looking at to what extent we can recapture and reuse water that they are wastefully basically sending out to sea. As of today, as not a water expert and not having done the year's work, I can't answer in a formal or technical or measured answer. But I think this is a civil engineering and environmental matter that can be dealt with money and ingenuity. And there's more ingenuity in Cambridge than almost anywhere.
Thanks very much, Peter. Going to have another question sort of on this subject, also on sewage. Because, yes, I'm afraid this all goes together. And of course, Homes England's development partner is Anglian Water. So, you know, there was an issue there, maybe for some people. So, Professor Susan Buckingham is going to talk about and ask you a question, I think, about sewage.
Thank you. Also co-founder of Friends of the Cam and recently Professor of Geography. In 2024, the Environment Agency found Anglian Water to be responsible for around 44,000 wastewater spills, lasting almost 450,000 hours. And this is a figure that's been rising year by year. Furthermore, the proposed new wastewater treatment plant on Greenbelt land, which will be replacing a recently upgraded works in North Cambridge, will not provide any additional capacity. How will waste be produced by the rapid expansion in the number of housing units, offices, labs be managed so that it doesn't spill into the Cam and its tributaries, precious chalk streams as they are, which in times of drought, which is increasing with increasing climate damage, has seen up to 40% of its flow comprised of sewage in drought years. Thank you.
Stark figures. One of the things I've learned from Dr. Paul Leinster is that sewage treatment plants are spread around, and deliberately spread around because of the cost of pumping each cubic metre to a single place. So he has a sort of map which is a bit like a sort of London tube map of all of the interconnections between sewage treatment works. I think it is entirely right for you to write to me and him listing all of the things that you are concerned about, and we must get them addressed.
Sorry, we're going through these, just the ones that have been submitted originally. We've got a question on housing from Robert Ench, if he's available. And Robert is a housing professional So, Robert, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Good evening, Peter. I work for It Takes a City Community Land Trust. We build modular homes for the homeless. If you're successful in building 100,000 houses over and above what's already planned, how are you going to ensure that it doesn't increase the amount of homelessness that we already have? It's a disgrace that our society allows this to happen. We know that house builders focus on profit and they build big, expensive houses, not houses for low-income families. We know that house builders seek to avoid building affordable houses because they don't make enough profit from them. We know that affordable houses in this area are already ridiculously unaffordable for low-income families. We also know from our experience of developments that have happened in this area that social housing is almost never considered in new developments. We can't cope with the volume of homelessness that's happening in this area already. I fear that it's going to increase with these turbocharging of housing. How do you propose to deal with that?
Right. I spent my last 4.5 years at Homes England, which is the principal provider of grants for housing associations. We provide about £1.5 billion a year for housing associations. We work with over 300 housing associations. So, I mean, it's something that is near and dear to me. It goes back to a problem that is embedded in the housing industry and the property industry generally. Sites are too often sold purely because somebody offered more money than anybody else. If you win a site merely because you offered more money, you don't have much appetite for doing anything other than starter homes and executive homes. It has to be the job of government, planners, agencies, growth companies to make sure that when land is allocated for housing, it is absolutely crystal clear that there has to be a true mix of housing from social rented to private ownership to build to rent. It's essential to do that in order to get the numbers the government would like to see. In the 50s and 60s, at least a third of housing every year was council housing, which was true social rented. What stops it getting built now is a while back, the government, probably getting on for 20 years ago now, the government said that there was to be no grant for Section 106 affordable housing. And so as soon as somebody's bought a site for too much money, they say, oh, I can't afford to do social rented. Maybe I can do some shared ownership, and maybe I can do 20% instead of 40%. And planners and committees have been under pressure to accept those sort of deals because they need to meet the housing numbers to stop fly-by-night appeals on other sites. We must stop that. We will allocate enough land. We will make it absolutely clear that the landowner and the developer must provide the full range of units at the full range of value points. Not only the full range of value points, units for old people, units for young people, for bigger families and smaller families, and homeless people. Sorry?
Can you commit to a percentage, she said?
I think I'd commit to a percentage of 50% on anything that's greenbelt currently, and I'd probably commit to, well, I'd certainly aim for 40% on anything. 40% affordable. Well, the social rented definitely isn't unaffordable, and yes, I know, but the Section 106s have to split it up, so it is clear that a portion of that has to be social rented. I don't really feel I can commit today. My personal aim is that 50% of affordable should be social rented.
So I've got one question on the submitted questions before we open to the floor properly. So lots of Cambridge residents are very worried about the impact of all this development on their environment. And we loved all the stuff that you showed in your slide. It's so incredibly reassuring. We all, who wouldn't agree with all that kind of stuff? But this question was sent to us from a North Newnham Residents Association. Our area of Cambridge, North Newnham, contains areas of protected open space. Protection is environmental, and in some cases, recreation as well. Developers are citing some of these spaces as emission sites, arguing that the environmental benefits can be relocated. And the issue here, I think, is that people are looking at what's happening in the planning bill, and they're seeing that there's a large fund for nature, and they're seeing that there's a possibility, a discussion, that if there is development in your area, that could be offset somewhere else. So that, for example, our lovely chalk streams or our beautiful green spaces in the city, which, we're talking about Cambridge, could be maybe offset in Scunthorpe, So I'm not that there's anything wrong with Scunthorpe, but it doesn't, for people who care about, nature and wildlife, and, the point is, and I'm afraid this is probably a bit of a question below the belt here. Okay, so Argent was one of the developer members of the Radical Regeneration Manifesto group of developers. And if you recall, at that Landmark Chambers meeting, I did cite Mike Derbyshire from Bidwells, who did say, on film, get the politicians out of the planning process, put developers in charge. And he did say it on film. So, we see this bill coming through, the planning bill, the fact that you don't have to, provide biodiversity on site. So where does that leave us in these nice green spaces? Sorry, Peter, I did say it was below the belt.
I don't know quite what the intention is, but my expectation or understanding is, as opposed to carbon offset, which carbon does float around the whole planet, and you could offset in Scunthorpe or indeed in a pine forest in Scotland, typically. I think the offset or off-site offset was very much aimed at smaller developments on constrained land not being held back from being developed because they didn't really have any satisfactory adjacent land themselves. I certainly wouldn't be encouraging any offset that wasn't within the area of...
Just the new planning bill will remove environmental protections. So I'm just sorry, I don't want to take up more extra time, etc. And I will take questions from the floor, but that is a concern. Yeah.
We will aim for more open space and more environment.
Well, I'm very glad to hear.
When I talked to James Littlewood of Cambridge Past, Present and Future, he was talking about the stepping stones and corridors they wanted to achieve. And I was looking at the cost of them achieving it and the land they would need. And in the context of no planned overall growth, it's not going to happen. In the context of planned overall growth, it's completely achievable, and we would seek to achieve it with him.
Right, so I'll take questions from the floor. I think we'll take one at the end aisle just here. I'll try and move around so that we don't just do the same bit. Okay.
Right. So this is working, yeah. Okay, thank you for your talk. I'm Tony Booth. I'm a candidate for Cambridge University Chancellor.
Good luck.
I've watched the involvement of the university and its colleges in development in our city and surrounding area over many years. I want them to act responsibly towards future generations of students and to residents of this city. I listened to your talk carefully. I heard no mention of the climate and biodiversity breakdown, the climate and biodiversity calamities which are affecting our world. It's clear from the government's own Climate Change Committee and rulings in the High Court that the UK government is not taking its obligations under the 2008 Climate Act seriously enough and is in breach of the law. Did you know that the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area now has 2 years left of its legally mandated carbon budget to 2050, according to a commission led by Baroness Brown? Will you insist that building plans in the Cambridge area remain within our carbon budget and the law, and that this will mean that building and development in this area has to be severely curtailed? Thank you.
Interestingly, one of the first meetings I had when I started coming up here nearly 2 years ago was with the bursar of Trinity College, who I think are the biggest sort of land-owning and college. And he said that if he was not looking also at sustainability and climate, he would be shot by half of his fellows. So that although as a bursar he has a kind of duty to maximise income, he also now feels that he has a duty required by his co-fellows to the environment. I've also in discussions with 2 or 3 other bursars talking about affordable housing on their land. They say that although, you know, as an individual trustee charity each college is, they should be maximising their revenue from their land like any other landowner. They regard that their overall mission is the university education in the city, and affordable housing contributes to that. So I think the university stewards are taking a responsible long-term view.
Sorry, we've got lots of other questions coming up. Sorry, but we have got other questions. So, who's right? I think we maybe should take questions in groups of 3, so that, or no, or do you think?
You expect I can remember?
Well, I'm just maybe okay. We'll stick to one at a time. Okay, so this one, we'll take one at the front here. Yeah.
We've had a system of democratically elected councillors, city, district and county for what, 150, 200 years now? Why do we need, and indeed how can you justify the Cambridge Growth Company being imposed on top of that reasonably successful structure? Because this feels to me, I'm Ian Rawls, Cambridge Friends of the Earth, this feels to me like sort of almost government by decree imposed on us by a scientifically and environmentally illiterate administration. And we kind of bitterly resent that, really, quite frankly.
The first thing is my instruction is absolutely to work closely with locally elected politicians, and it's my inclination as well as my instruction. The second thing is going back to my comments on the importance of focus. If you are a locally elected councillor, you are under tremendous pressure worrying about old people, young people, refuse collection. And you're also worried by a 3-year or 4-year electoral cycle. I think the purpose of the Growth Company is to be able to take a really laser-focused view on what is the right master planning, what is the right infrastructure, how can it be financed, how can it be delivered consistently. And I think that isn't taking away from the democratic deficit. Making a democratic deficit, it's created by the mother of all parliaments, and it's being run in association with an advisory council on which all of the elected leaders sit.
Ian?
I'm an official. I'm not a politician.
Sorry. Peter has answered. Question here, please.
Thank you. My name's David from the Parish Council in Coton. Thank you for your presentation, and also thank you for what you did in King's Cross. I go there most days for work, and it's brilliant.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about transport.
Yeah.
So you hinted in your presentation that a really good vision and a really good master plan could lead to the best transport solution for Cambridge. But as we sit here today, there are some really bad transport plans out there, such as guided busways and the route for East West Rail. Will your vision and plan come in time to make sure that those bad plans don't happen? Thank you.
Well, I wouldn't want to prejudge whether they're good or bad plans. There are some people who like them, including the democratically elected local leaders. In relation to some of the guided bus routes, I think an important thing about them is they are transport corridors. So if there was the budget and the inclination, and it was proved that trams or light rail were better to go down those corridors, securing the corridors is nevertheless a hugely important step. Part of our evidence base is transport. I think working with the locally elected leaders, we will probably set up some kind of roundtable committee to instruct new transport advice. But this is like one of many matters where I say I'll come back in a year and won't duck the question.
Next question. Can we have, we will have that lady at the back, has been waiting a long time. Yes, stand up.
Thanks. Jenny Conroy. I'm here as a resident of Cambridge of many years, but I'm also representing the Save Honey Hill group. I didn't intend to sound emotional, so just bear with me while I settle down. Given the government's current track record of overturning our local council's objections on environmental grounds of a number of significant planning applications, and more recently, in the case of Honey Hill and Anglian Water, the Secretary of State disregarding his own planning inspector's recommendation to refuse its application to relocate to the Greenbelt. How can residents of Cambridge and businesses that have invested here on the strength of what's good about Cambridge have any faith that supercharging it is going to do anything other than apply a wrecking ball? For context, I would add, the planning inspector's recommendation to refuse the application from Anglian Water followed 6 months of forensic examination that got behind the headlines of enabling more homes. It concluded harm to Greenbelt, historical assets, and essentially the setting of Cambridge, and carbon cost of dismantling and rebuilding a wastewater treatment works that did not require upgrading, did not outweigh the benefit of the promise of homes, the number of which are uncertain. In fact, the best estimate from the local councils is 3,250 homes across the North East Cambridge area by 2041, not simply on the Anglian Water sites alone. And even this figure has been undermined, as Anglian Water have already sold off some of their land intended for housing for R&D development. Despite the uncertainty of the number of homes that will be built, the environmental harm, impact on the setting of Cambridge, and the cost of which, Ms. Freeman, you will know only too well, to the public purse of £277 million to resite the wastewater treatment works. Despite all of this, the Secretary of State said yes. It would seem here in Cambridge, at government level, we are in the position of houses at any cost. Returning to the question, how can we have any faith of a promise of sustainable development given what is already happening around us? Thank you.
And I strongly recommend, Peter, that actually it's well worth making a trip to some of these villages. The Horningsea is absolutely gorgeous, so is Coton. These are lovely places. They really are worth seeing.
And it's a principal chalk aquifer as
Anyway,
well.
yes, okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's enough. Thank you. Yeah.
Difficult to answer without having a full chapter and verse, which you had in front of you, but what you say needs bearing in mind. I will take back to the office and find more out about it.
Excellent. Can we have, on that row, yes, stand up. Yeah. This might be a transport question.
So, good evening, everyone. My name is William Harold. I'm from Cambridge Approaches. I'm based in Haslingfield, so I'm in the kind of low-density bit round Cambridge. It's a lovely village. Wendy at the start mentioned 2 different projects coming from central government to help us here in the Cambridge area. So one is, your one about 15-minute neighbourhoods in Cambridge, which all sounds kind of interesting. And there's another one which she mentioned, which is the Oxcam Arc, which used to be the Oxcam Arc, is now the Oxcam Corridor. And so our kind of opener with that one has been, how do you like a 100-mile-an-hour railway through your village? By the way, it's going to cost £4 million per Cambridge commuter, which is their figures. So my question to you, I know you're not responsible for East West Rail, but does what you're doing depend on the Oxcam Arc, or is that a separate project? Because it's obviously not a very 15-minute neighbourhood type project. It's more of a kind of rural sprawl type thing. So I'm just interested in your view on the connectedness between what you're doing and that, and any views you have on the Oxcam Arc as well.
I mean, the Oxcam Arc was largely, when announced last time around, which I think probably 10 years ago, was largely 1 million houses. And I think it was misconceived from the outset, being about houses more than jobs or places or communities. And it led to the Chesham by-election, which to some extent was at the beginning of the end for the last government. I think a difference this time, you will have noticed that the minister responsible for it, the champion for the corridor, is the science minister, sort of a hero of the COVID period, an acknowledged doctor and scientist in his own right. So I think this time the government is much more focused in the corridor about science growth ideas, and as opposed to last time, sort of, as you say, Spool, looking at housing across, I think it was something like 60 districts, which is a lot to bite off in one. This time it's more focused on the ideas, and there's something you've probably come across, the Super Cluster Board, which Dr. Andy Williams chairs, which is really trying to bring Milton Keynes and Bedford and Cranfield into it, as well as Oxford and Cambridge. In relation to are we part of that or our own thing, we were announced ahead of that. I think that we are, going back to my perpetual comment about focus, my focus is on Cambridge. What we do in Cambridge will help the growth of the corridor, but my focus will be making sure that Cambridge gets the right places, the right transport, the right water, and the right affordable housing.
And the money.
And the money.
Right. Sorry, I think a question right at the back there. We've been shortchanged at the back. Okay.
Thanks very much, and thanks for being here, Peter. I'm a Cambridge resident of several years and studied at the university, and I'm also a small business owner. My name is Max Bloomfield. You mentioned, hopefully this is an easy question for you to answer. So you mentioned in the introduction that you were involved in King's Cross development, and as you'll know, King's Cross has become one of the most prominent examples of what's known as private-public space. Areas that appear open to the public, but are in fact privately owned and controlled. In such spaces, fundamental democratic rights, such as protest, assembly, photography, or even simply sitting, can be restricted at the discretion of private owners. This model has been widely criticised, including by commentators such as George Monbiot, for eroding the public realm and excluding less desirable members of society. Here in Cambridge, we already face a landscape where large areas of land and property are owned or controlled by the university and colleges, many of which are inaccessible or restricted to the public. This has created a fragmented and often exclusionary urban fabric. As the plans for the growth and development of Cambridge move forward, can you give a clear commitment that new developments will not replicate this pseudo-public model? Will you ensure that the future public spaces in Cambridge are genuinely public, free, open and democratically governed and welcoming to all, not just those with purchasing power?
What you have said there has been said in some journals and by some commentators. I have to say it's simply not true. It is true that the King's Cross estate owns the public open space. It was agreed with the council that if we kept it to above adoptable standards, which we do by a long way, and if we made it truly accessible to the public, which we do, we could keep the maintenance of it because it is for the public's benefit. If you go to the main square, there are 1,100 fountain jets in which children from all the local estates or visiting tourists play 6 or 7 months a year. There is no charge for it. When it's Wimbledon, we put a big screen up. We put out, I think, about 500 deck chairs. It's free to watch. Nobody has to buy a coffee or an ice cream or go to a restaurant. It is totally, totally accessible to the public, and that's how we intended it to be, and it is.
We'd take a question over there, because we're just trying to be a little bit distributive about questions. I haven't got a watch, Jean, so I'm expecting you to keep an eye on timekeeping, because we're just looking to see how we're doing.
David Plank from the Trumpington Residents Association. We did actually submit a question beforehand, which hasn't been referred to, but much of the ground's been covered, except two key things. The first is hospitals and health services, where we actually have a crisis now, here and now, in the hospitals in particular, not being able to serve the public that they're to serve. It's shocking to think that there is no direct relationship between population growth and hospital provision and health service provision. No direct relationship. The other thing that struck me in what has been said is in terms of the government's apparent lack of commitment to actually producing the wherewithal for this development to take place, as in the hospitals and the health service, where they're actually cutting jobs at the moment, not increasing them. The other one is in relation to housing and homelessness, where, as has been commented, people have been priced out of Cambridge. People on average and below incomes have been priced out of Cambridge. Social housing is referred to, but it needs to be at truly affordable rents, and it needs to be accompanied by, and this is a real test for this government, abolition of the right to buy. I'd be grateful for your comments.
So what the question was, David? And he didn't introduce himself. Did he introduce himself? But what's the question?
How is the government, how is the Cambridge Growth Company going to deal with those two?
I agree with you. And the very first thing I did when I was appointed to this role nearly 2 years ago was sit down and work out pro rata primary schools, secondary schools, hospital beds, doctors' surgeries, parks, playgrounds, and a cost for them. And it has been absolutely front and centre of all discussions between me, the department, the Treasury, that if this programme is to be launched, there must be the money to meet the needs that you're describing. I believe that that money can largely be taken out of the land value uplift in Cambridge, not all of it, and something like hospital beds is ultimately part of national budgets, but it's absolutely essential, and I will say it again and again, to the success of the project for the government commercially, that the infrastructure, social and physical, is there, because otherwise the take-up and the economic growth won't be there. So there's no point doing one without the other.
Question from Anthony Carpenter. Anthony, keep your questions short though, right? Promise. You know, promise. Here's form.
Quick question to the audience. Hands up if you are under the age of 25. One of the comments online was that there are not enough young people in the audience. So really question for you, Peter, is how will you engage with schools, with children and young people to ensure that their views and their ambitions and hopes are achieved? Thank you.
So I won't necessarily make Katie answer it, but sitting in the front row is one of our first recruits to the Cambridge Growth Company, who is here to do engagement. But the important thing is Katie was born and bred, went to school in Cambridge. Her parents both work well, one in Cambridge, I think, and one in Huntingdon. But sorry? And you're not much older than 25. Excellent. So we will be sending Katie and people round schools just as soon as we have enough manpower to do it. So far, I've not visited many schools. I went to Hills Road, being the obvious nearest one. But we've got to engage young people. We've got to make sure that there aren't only jobs for fancy postdocs from all over the world, but there are good jobs for local people. Early on, Mike Davies sent me out to see Abbey people, and until I went to the Abbey ward, I was only aware of kind of one Cambridge that was privileged, and there is clearly another Cambridge, and we need to help lift it.
Actually, the councillor for that area is here. Did you want to ask a question?
Thank you very much. I'm glad that you made a whistle-stop tour of Abbey, which is the ward I represent. It's also where I live. We've recently had an election on the doorstep. We hear a lot of anger, a lot of disillusionment, and a lot of distrust. People don't think their voices are being heard. They feel that things are being done to them and not done with them. So how are you going to make things transparent and open when your advisory council has met twice, and yet we have no minutes, no publication online? How are you going to make residents of my ward feel that you're not concreting over the places they love, destroying their green spaces and polluting the river they bathe in when they can't afford to go on holiday?
I mean, my visit to Abbey Life with Abbey people with Nikki Shepherd should be followed up to a visit with you. So if you're happy, I'll come and see you in the next couple of weeks and see the green places that you care about, and we will protect them.
Question there, and the lady in the next there. Would you say who you are, please?
Oh, hi. Thank you. Katie Preston, resident, Cambridge, Rustat Residents' Road Association. Yeah, there are a lot of everything has already been said in one sense, but what I am not hearing is the real emphasis on biodiversity. You said that you want us to be happy. You have made the comparison with King's Cross, which in itself, just visiting it, certainly looks like a wonderful development. It's my feeling that however complex King's Cross is, it's nothing like as complex as Cambridge. There are so many issues here. But also, you said you wanted us to be happy. You know, in spite of all the problems of Cambridge, one way in which we are both happy and greedy is that we already enjoy quite a large level of biodiversity in particular areas. And as somebody else said, we don't want those taken away. And as Wendy said very clearly, we don't want those taken away, offset somewhere else. And you're talking about developments which seem to echo King's Cross in many ways. Public open spaces don't come near it for what we already have here in Cambridge. And so we want both the existing biodiversity that we have protected, as well as in whatever development there is, not just tick boxes to public open spaces, but actual biodiversity. You said you wanted a happy city. From what you've heard tonight, it's very, very hard to imagine how, whatever your plans are, they can produce a happy Cambridge.
So your question is, Katie, what's your question?
I think I got it.
You got it.
Well, in a sense, that's the end of it. You know, with everything that's been said here tonight, and with what I said, and wanting to both have our own biodiversity, how on earth can you imagine that you're going to produce a happy Cambridge?
I think that as we begin to build a team, and I just introduced Katie, who is engaged in engagement. One of our earliest appointments is a guy called Nathan, who is a kind of ecology specialist. And what I need to do, what my role is to put a team in place who has every different form of expertise so that we can act as a kind of intelligent interface, intelligent client. And I have no doubt that in the, I think it's 90,000 hectares of South Cambridgeshire, there are things that we can do that increase leisure, biodiversity, access to public open space, which won't happen without the money and the will. And what government has to deliver back to you is, if more development is happening, if there is intensification of jobs and homes in Cambridge, it has to deliver back those increased benefits. And I think that's possible to do. So I'm not saying it's all like King's Cross, but what I am pointing out is that at King's Cross, the land paid for the primary school, it paid for the fountains, it paid for the public open space, it pays for a rolling programme of events. And I think that can be achieved in scale in Cambridge in perpetuity.
Take a question on the side then. Is it in the blue jacket? Yep.
Hello, thank you, and hello everyone. My name is Catherine Fisher. I'm from the Green Party. I have maybe a new style of question, which is I'm interested that you've mentioned that you want to kind of supercharge the science and tech industries, and I've done a quick Google, and they bring in £108 billion a year, but interestingly, the arts, is this still working? The arts industries, they bring in £125 billion a year. Why is it that we're always focusing on science and tech industries in Cambridge and never on arts? I would like to add a kind of gendered perspective to this, in that science and tech industries are predominantly dominated by men, and they don't do a great job at getting women and girls involved. So are we not just prioritising the happiness and the growth of men over women?
A lovely point. I actually think when I've walked around the laboratory of molecular biology, I see as many women in white coats as men, but you probably have a point. And on arts, we would want them to flourish too. And Brindley Place, we built a theatre and an art gallery. The first occupier at King's Cross was Central St Martin's Art School. So although the government focus and the focus on the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor is about science, and it's led by a science minister, a happy city and a holistic city has fires on every cylinder and every type of activity. And that's what makes it a wonderful place to live, that there's the diversity for those who want to do bell ringing and those who want to split atoms.
Question in the middle there, and Anna, I think just to balance the councillor questions. Anna Bradner, just there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, Peter, and thank you for coming to Cambridge. My name is Anna Bradnam, and I'm the County Councillor for Waterbeach Division, which is just on the northern edge of the city. You talked earlier on, and you represented in your presentation about how part of the beauty of Cambridge had been because people safeguarded green spaces like Jesus Green in that lovely avenue right at the outset of developing the city. And I would like to put in your mind and the minds of everybody here today how short we are of green space on the periphery of the city. We're very fortunate. I live in Milton, and we're very lucky to have Milton Country Park, but it is extremely heavily used. So I would like to throw this pebble in the pond, and that is that you safeguard the area to the north of Cambridge, just north of where we're planning the Hartree development, as part of this unpopular removal of the wastewater treatment works. But can we just consider safeguarding space in the green belt for open space to at least diffuse the need? You know, we need open space for walking. I'm sorry for the people in the area where the wastewater treatment works is being proposed, but if we need to protect these green spaces around the city in order to provide green spaces for our people to walk in and have leisure time.
I said that I wouldn't get drawn on which areas were in and which areas were out. Now, I would in a year's time. I completely agree with the principle. I think on that sort of wheel of distances, the most important and shortest distance ought to be to a local park, and it shouldn't be far to a much bigger park. So I'm completely with you on protecting space for public open space.
Can we take a question next, and gentleman there with the beard? Yeah, just there. Sorry.
Yes, my name is Cameron Adams. I recently retired from the Environment Agency after years of frustration. The ongoing and longer-term impacts of climate change across the east of England are really not that favourable. For example, sea level rise, saline intrusion, and the Fens potentially becoming a dust bowl due to higher temperatures, prolonged droughts, soil loss and erosion, which is exceeding that of Ethiopia. With all that in mind, and Cambridge by the Sea being a very real prospect, probably in about 100 years' time, is Cambridge really the right place for new development?
I know the Fens are low. I didn't think Cambridge was that low, but when I was reading, I think, a history of Cambridge given to me by Robert Pollock, I hadn't realised that it was actually a serious port and a title until, I think, the 17th century. So, we're check. We're check.
Right, sorry, I'm just, the lady just there, that one there, talk, yes, Monica. Yeah.
Thank you.
There we are. Sorry, keep, Monica.
Sorry, I need to get my question up I was just going to say, thanks to Anthony's response earlier. I think contrary to what you might assume from the room today, the median age in Cambridge is actually 35. It's the 4th youngest city in the country. And I just wanted to ask, you talked a lot in your speech about this consultation process as part of your evidence base. How will you ensure that young people like me, people who rent privately in the city, where my rents are going up year on year, above inflation, I'm kind of locked out of the housing market. To someone like me, a lot of new market rate supply is very promising because it's the only way we're ever going to stabilise rents and actually bring down prices. How will you ensure that the consultation process actually engages enough of people like me? Because as we can see, the planning process tends to skew in the other direction and doesn't systematically kind of profile the population in the correct way.
I think the consultation process, which will be extensive, must in a way be scientific, so it shouldn't just be hearing from those who shout to be heard. It needs to reach out in a kind of relatively scientific, cross-demographic way, and that will ensure that people like you are heard, but also people like you must come forward to make sure you are heard. And it's a kind of interactive process.
Can I just add a point on that, Peter? I think Cambridge is done on consultation process. We've been done to death on consultation process. Very hard. It is hard to get people to engage.
Yeah.
So, the lady who didn't get to ask a question before, yes, you.
I guess I'm just curious to see how many people here actually want to see Cambridge grow. So could you put your hands up if you want to see Cambridge grow?
Yeah.
Okay, and how many people are perfectly happy with the size of Cambridge as it is? Okay, I was just really curious to see how you would persuade people who don't want to see Cambridge grow.
Well, I mean, what was very interesting for me, sort of doing a rough count, is actually the number of hands was relatively equal for both cases. So I don't think anybody would ever hope to please everybody, but I think even in this room where I thought perhaps most people would be predisposed to be opposed before they came in, a healthy number were in favour of growth. And, ultimately for the next generation, for the future, for the relevance of Cambridge, the relevance of Britain, we can't stop things growing. And, if 100 years ago there had been a vote that said no more growth, probably 80% of you wouldn't have houses because they were built in the last 100 years.
There's a question. Could you say who you are, please?
Yes, Andrew Dames, local businessman and Just Stop Oil campaigner.
You're, sorry, what?
Just Stop Oil campaigning over the last few years. Andrew Dames, local businessman and Just Stop Oil campaigner. I enjoyed you get painted, in a sense, two different pictures of growth. One, I suppose, the references to Islington and Camden, possibly central Edinburgh, I don't know. And the other one with sort of spoke and wheel, like, Camborne, Northstowe type situation. I was wondering, personally, yourself, do you have a feeling which way you want to swing between those two extremes?
I probably have a feeling which one I would prefer to live in, but I also have a feeling that within the wider market of people, there's some people who want higher density, there's some people who want lower density, some people absolutely want their own front door, some people are very happy to live in a block of flats, some people would prefer to share a communal garden, some people would prefer to have their own garden, and I think in meeting the needs of a city and its population, you need some of all. The reason Wendy called this Happy City is after we met last time, I sent her a book called Happy City. And one of the wonderful moments in it is when 2 people in Vancouver took down the fence between their garden, and then the 3rd one did, and then the 4th one did, and eventually every fence had disappeared between houses on 2 streets facing each other, and it had become one big communal garden. And then they went to the council and said, and by the way, we're closing the road down on Friday evening, and we're having a street party every Friday evening in the summer. So, you know, it takes all sorts, and ultimately the community should control their destiny, and people should choose what sort of home and settlement they want to live in.
Right, so we've got just time for, I think it's just about winding up time, because I think poor Peter's had a lot of questions. We're going to take one final question. I know you want to ask the question about Honey Hill, but we have had a question about Honey Hill, Catherine. So, yeah, I think we'll just have one, just that gentleman standing up very keen. Oh, it's another councillor. I didn't realise, Mr. Bagents.
Hardly a gentleman. Dave Bagent from Romsey, City Councillor.
We've done it fairly now. 3.
Can I say it was very interesting to see that vote, because people want homes built affordably, and then some people don't want the city to expand. So the 2 problems are so incongruous, so difficult. And that is a problem that we have in this city because of our success. But my question, Peter, is, you've talked about local democracy and the fact that we have one of each of the leaders from 3 areas on the second committee. 4, sorry, from the 4 areas on the second committee. How much sway will those 4 leaders have? And should it really be a bit more than 4? Because you're talking about a population covering the whole of Cambridgeshire. We've always used the word Cambridge tonight, mostly. But we are talking about Cambridgeshire, aren't we? We're not just talking about Cambridge. And I just think, my fear is that the sense of democracy will be drawn away from us. Now, I'm not for or against what happens. I need to see what you're going to tell us and advise us on. But I would like to see a greater strength of democracy within that decision-making. Thank you.
Somebody earlier pointed out the minutes for the advisory committee still haven't gone up yet. They will go up shortly. We're just awaiting clearance from the elected members. Nothing much has happened in the first 2 advisory committees, partly because elections were coming, and partly because they were being set up and largely discussing the nature of the advisory committee. We thought it was important that it was a small number of people, that the conversations were reasonably open and transparent, but that they weren't too formal, and that the members were free to keep their opinions and express their opinions outside. There wasn't a need to have a kind of collective cabinet decision-making. So what we discuss in the room is with a view to try and get as much consensus as possible. But if a particular elected member disagrees with what the growth company or the department wants to do, they are entirely free to say that publicly. I think it's a sort of best of both worlds for everybody in a period in which the ideas are evolving quickly, where the elected leaders are not having to give up what they believe in any way, but they are able to communicate effectively what they believe, and we can hear them and factor that in. Well, whatever central government ultimately wants to do will have to go through a process of plan making in the way of.
You have to stick to the brief, but I totally take your points on board. Now, someone's just passed me a note, who's been watching and saying there's the lady in the green coat who's had her hand up throughout the whole evening. So, can we give the lady in the green coat? She might be controversial, though. So anyway.
This lady?
Yes, I think it's this lady.
And because I have got a bit of a sore throat, so in fact I'm going to ask this lady here to ask the question on my behalf.
There we are. Oh, right. There we are.
Sorry, Mr. Freeman, my questions have been evolving throughout the evening. There's so many things. I'm Catherine. I'm from the Save Honey Hill campaign. First thing I want to say is I'm scared, not happy. And it doesn't help that you appear not to be familiar with the matter of the relocation of Anglian Water sewage works to the site of a principal chalk aquifer in agricultural greenbelt, which is just a mere mile from its current site. And this is countryside that is currently enjoyed by people from the city who come out to visit Kwai Fen and walk in the bucolic countryside. You're also, it appears, not familiar with the fact that despite the Planning Inspectorate recommending refusal of the development consent order, the Secretary of State ignored the experts and granted consent anyway. Now, Homes England, a body that you led, granted £227 million of housing infrastructure funding to facilitate this relocation, and then last year had to increase that grant by a further £50 million because of spiralling costs. Will there be more money coming from Homes England when the costs continue to spiral, which we all know they will? Will Homes England continue to break its own funding limits to move a privately owned wastewater treatment plant that doesn't need to be moved?
Right, and that's the last question tonight. Oops. Right.
We are meeting with Anglia Water to look at all the matters. And I'm no longer wearing a Homes England hat on that, but I'm still wearing a Cambridge Growth Company hat on it. We will have to examine the situation very carefully and make the right recommendation to government.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I'm going to round off the proceedings tonight. Do you want to say? Well,
very good question.
Thank you. Well, I was. Well, I should like to thank our speaker, Peter Freeman, for accepting our invitation to come and talk to the Cambridge residents. I mean, this was really appreciated. I have to say, I've already said we were delighted when he accepted the invitation. And we did warn him that he would face lots of robust questions. So I think he has done. And if you haven't had a question, which wasn't answered today, please send it to us via the link on our website or on the leaflet at the meeting, which I think Barbara's got at the end of the nave. And we will post the questions and replies. Peter has said he can't promise that they will individually reply to all the questions, but they will certainly group them in topics and you will get a response. So we will put those replies in the FeCRA newsletter, which will be sent to those who are on our mailing list. So as you can see, there's a lot of interest in the Cambridge Growth Company and the plans for our small and exquisite medieval city with its cows and its ducks and its river and its communities, because that's really also at the heart of what we're talking about tonight, that's been selected by the government to be the model for building 150,000 homes and turbocharged growth. This whole event has been entirely facilitated by residents. It would not have been possible without your support and some people's generosity and your networks. So finally, can we all channel our energy into creating a more equal city where the interests of the planet and future generations comes first, rather than just funneling off all the jobs and wealth into the southeast? Collectively, can we put aside our differences and work together in a generous and constructive way on improving the quality of everyone's lives, rather than killing our river and wrecking what makes Cambridge special? Let's hope so. Thank you all very much for attending.